Well, think about what happened here on this sea. You saw Jesus walk across the water. You saw Jesus calm the storm. When we get over to Capernaum, we're going to see that Jesus had control over nature. That's one of the clues that he's the Messiah, because nature is something that can hurt us, and Jesus actually has power over nature. We'll talk more about that when we get over into Capernaum, his adopted hometown, right over there, as Ellie just said. They've discovered about 16 harbors, at least 16 ancient harbors in this sea, which is really, as Ellie said, it's not a sea, it's a lake. And it's called many different names in the Bible. But I want to point out that the scripture is not only straightforward in many cases, but it's also subtle. And it is a tapestry when you really look at it. I mean, you can get things that are very direct, such as you're saved by grace through faith, not by works. You know how you're saved. You're saved because of Christ's sacrifice. But then you can get real subtle indicators that this is a divinely inspired series of books. For example, Psalm 107. If you have a Bible, go to Psalm 107. You say, why? We're on the Sea of Galilee. Why are we looking in Psalm 107? Well, if you go to Psalm 107, I'll give you a second to get there. I'm going to read a section of Psalm 107. This is Psalm 107, verse 23 to verse 30. It says, "Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted the waves of the sea." Now, before we go any further, Mount Arbel over there, see the cliff right there? Well, wind is known to come off that cliff, come down into this sea, which is below sea level, as you know, whip across to the other side, ricochet off the Golan Heights, and create storms that can come up in a heartbeat. And in fact, it could happen right now. And we could be tossed like just waves in a sea. We could find ourselves in a world of hurt, right? Before, especially in the first century, when you had no idea what the weather was going to be 10 minutes from now. Even today, we don't know. They had no radar, none of that. This stuff could happen just almost instantaneously. And so here in Psalm 107, it says that God raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. So these people on these boats are now scared. They reeled, they staggered like drunken men, and were at their wits' end. Does this sound familiar? That's what the disciples were, right? And Jesus is asleep in the boat. He's asleep while all this is going on. Now, this is Psalm 107, though. This is before Jesus. I'm just saying, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad because they had quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Psalm 107, written maybe 1,000 years before Jesus was here on this sea. Do you see what Jesus is claiming to be here? He's claiming to be God by calming the storms, or by calming the storm. It's a reenactment of Psalm 107. Psalm 107 says Yahweh calms the storm. Jesus comes to this same sea, and he calms the storm, and he takes them to their desired haven. Heaven too, yeah, you could say that. In fact, look at the parallels here. In Psalm 107, you've got sailors in ships. Then you've got a stormy wind and waves. Their courage melts away. They cry out to the Lord. The Lord stills the storm. The waves of the sea are quiet, and he takes them to their desired haven. In Mark chapter 4, which records this story, the disciples are in boats rather than sailors. You have the same stormy wind and waves. The courage melts away of the people in Psalm 107. Here, the disciples are afraid. They cry out to the Lord in Psalm 107. Here in Mark 4, they cry out to Jesus. In Psalm 107, the Lord stills the storm. Right here, Jesus stills the storm. In Psalm 107, the waves of the sea are quiet. In Mark 4, there was a great calm, and he took them to the shore, their desired haven. So you can see that sometimes the scriptures are straightforward. Sometimes they're subtle. And you can see this great tapestry that has been woven by 40 different authors over 1,500 years. That there's a divine hand behind all of this. This is not an invented story. It's a story that really happened, but it echoes something that the Old Testament, the psalmist, talked about 1,000 years prior to that. And by the way, we saw the same thing when we were for those of you who were in Qumran, and we talked about Isaiah 53. You read Isaiah 53 today, and you know it's about Jesus, but if you don't know which testament it's in, you go, oh, that's got to be in the New Testament. No, it's actually in the Old Testament. And there are patterns that you see over and over again in the scriptures if you look closely enough. Any questions? Can we play some more of that praise music?
Yes, we have something for you.
Oh, good.
We can show you example with the net.
Oh, good. Yeah, let's do that.
Catch the fish with the net.
Hey, this is Elijah from the Galilee, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, everyone. I just want to tell you something. It's very, very interesting, what's happening here on the Sea of Galilee. And Frank talked about the storm that was here, that was in the time of Jesus. Before a few months ago, it was a huge storm. A lot of that kind of tourist boat was jumping up and rocking. Some hotel in the Sea of Galilee. And again, what we're talking about? We're talking about detail that we have in the Bible. Small detail. There is a storm like that, a huge storm in the Sea of Galilee? Yes, because we have it also today. And you can see how we can go to the Bible and you can see how the truth is the Bible. Not just what's happening in that time, also what's happening today. So it's just fantastic.
And let me make one other point that I forgot to make. Remember we were talking about the other day how preachers will sometimes take a event and they'll spiritualize it. So they'll talk about Jesus calming the storm, and the application for you is what? He'll calm the storm in your life. Is that true? Is that what this passage is teaching? No, that's not the purpose of the passage. In fact, Jesus may bring storms into your life. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. So you may get more storms becoming a Christian. No, the purpose of the passage isn't to say that Jesus is going to calm the storms in your life. The purpose of the passage is that Jesus is God over nature. And that he can literally calm storms. That he can turn water into wine. That he can do these nature miracles where he can calm the sea and tell the wind what to do. And he can do all sorts of nature miracles. That's the purpose of the passage. It's an historical event that is actually hearkening back to Psalm 107. Yes.